So they made an animated movie out of The Killing Joke, and surprise, surprise, people seem to hate it. I haven't seen it myself yet because I wasn't at Comic-Con and I'm not going to pirate it, but basically everybody I trust that did see it has reported that it's kind of a shit show, and the panel they held for it at Comic-Con apparently went over like a lead balloon. What a shock. Plus, it's not unethical to talk about it because I'm not reviewing it, so yeah. The big controversy, as pretty much everybody has already heard, is that the film expands on the narrative of the original comic book version by giving Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, more backstory and screen time before the Joker sets the main plot in motion by shooting her through the spine, which is actually not a bad idea at all, since if there's one fairly irrefutable criticism of The Killing Joke in its original form, it's that for all its vaunted complexity, it still doesn't manage to avoid having the only female character on hand exist solely to get crippled and at least implicitly sexually assaulted in order to spur the male hero into action, so not a bad idea. Unfortunately, the backstory they apparently came up with is almost entirely about her not being good enough as a crime fighter and things getting weird with Batman because they fucked. So basically they had two of the worst possible places they could take this character and said, why not both? I mean, seriously, I know the whole point of the now decades-old, played-out, supremely tiresome post-Frank Miller grimdark, my parents are dead version of Batman is that he's not necessarily a clear-cut good guy, but holy shit, folks, the whole anti-hero thing is usually supposed to be about big-deal moral ambiguity stuff like surveillance state and public good versus civil rights and the hero we need and all that crap. This is just some regular-ass creeper shit. I mean, even put aside the quasi-incestuous power dynamic stuff in play, just on the list of things that even the darkest hero probably shouldn't be doing, his best friend's daughter is right up near the top, right? Now look, I'm not against an R-rated superhero story. I don't want to censor the various branches of Warner Brothers from making all the grim and gritty 90s comics bullshit that is apparently the only thing they know how to do in this genre, but it occurs to me that this is exactly the thing that highlights why making a movie out of Killing Joke, or really anything with Killing Joke in 2016, is such a terrible idea. Maybe not as terrible an idea as smashing The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman into one story turned out to be for Batman vs. Superman, which is probably still the worst movie of 2016 by a wide margin, but they come from the same basic wrong-headed place. For those wondering what the hell I'm talking about, The Killing Joke was a 1988 one-shot Batman graphic novel by Alan Moore that attempted to do the darkest possible version of what was basically a classic-style Batman vs. Joker story wherein the Clown Prince of Crime brutalizes Barbara Gordon, then kidnaps her father to psychologically torture him about it in order to prove that anyone can be turned into something like the Joker by having just one bad day, intersped with flashbacks to explain what he's referencing by bad day that comprise what's probably still the best hypothetical Joker origin story anyone has ever come up with. Oh, and Batman is there too, he punches people. So yeah, for years it was one of those untouchable comics that fanboys had internalized so much that nobody dared have anything negative to say about it, and as such it's become a popular punching bag for pent-up naysayers like yours truly now that enough time has passed, but I think it's a pretty good read overall still. I know Alan Moore hates it now, and I can't really disagree with him and his main criticism that it's kind of just shock value for shock value, and despite all the pretense of getting into the depths of Batman and Joker's psychology, it ultimately doesn't really have anything to say about anything outside of, hey, would you look at this freak show? But you know, in 1988 there was still genuine novelty to be wrung from doing that in a mainstream superhero book. It's not Moore's best mainstream DC work, that's probably still Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, but it's fine. On the other hand, it's also one of those initially groundbreaking books like Dark Knight Returns and Demon in a Bottle and Green Lantern number 76 that became the go-to canon for the "see, they aren't just for kids, take me seriously" comic reading crowd, and as such ended up being made to cast a shadow over the entire rest of a book or a character's history. In this case, quite literally, since DC made Barbara Gordon being paralyzed canon in official continuity for over a decade. And the problem with that is, in most cases, those shock value novelty stories belong to their very specific moments in time. Moments when Let's Try This was novel enough that there didn't need to be anything else to them. But allowing something like Killing Joke to become one of the definitive cornerstones of this franchise, instead of just the lurid, era-specific Batman footnote that it works best as, because a disproportionate allocation of voices being heard are still overly obsessed with it, is how you end up with decisions like taking a not great story and a hopelessly out-of-date story and saying, let's bet hundreds of millions of dollars and decades worth of follow-ups on a combination of these. And it's also why, even though Iron Man 2 is pretty much an average movie at best, the smartest decision it makes overall is burning off the relatively small number of genuinely useful narrative ideas and moments you can get from Demon in a Bottle storyline and allowing the characters to move on either to new stories or adaptations of stories that still have functionality beyond, hey, isn't this different? And that's really the main thing. The number one reason to not revive Killing Joke for 2016 in a movie or otherwise is, even if you're doing it to try and fix the problem of Batgirl's role in the story, which they didn't do is that it was so influential that revisiting it is redundant now. What was shocking in 1988 has been the norm for pretty much every live-action Batman movie, and certainly every damn Batman comic since it came out. Hell, it's not even really appreciably darker than that Batman Beyond movie. There's no point to it anymore. I feel the same way about when they recolored the comic for the anniversary. And yeah, I know that's supposedly how Brian Boland wanted it to look originally, but I don't know. From where I sit, a big part of what made Killing Joke so visceral in its day was that it had such a different narrative sensibility while still looking very much like every other high-contrast, garishly colored normal book DC put out in the era. Recoloring it to look like any other present-day Batman comic makes it feel less special because so many modern Batman books are still doing Killing Joke impressions that taking away the old-school aesthetic, in effect, makes it feel like any other random book instead of something special. I don't know, kids. Maybe this is just your grumpy Uncle Bob being preemptively I told you so about the movie, but I'm sorry. At some point, we've got to stop forcing legacy comics and comic adaptations to be defined by a handful of one-time boundary-pushing, edgy books from the late 80s and the avalanche of mediocrity they begat in the 90s. Marvel largely let that happen, and it's a big part of why their movies are so successful now. But for some reason, Warner Brothers wants DC to stay right the hell where they are, stuck in time. And before you try to yeah-butt me on this, please remember, this is fucking Aquaman now.